George Kilpatrick, inspiration for the nation, celebrating people we feel good about. We have a special tribute today to the late Honorable Judge Langston McKinney, the first African-American judge in the history of the city of Syracuse, the first Black law partnership, May McKinney and Melchor, and many other firsts, this pioneer, this giant, this activist, this person who's a graduate of Howard University and a graduate of Syracuse University College of Law, who really gave his all to this community. So we invited a number of his colleagues, friends. We're not sure who's showing up today. And I say we're not sure because I will know by the time y'all see this. But it's going to be a opportunity for many of his friends to join us in conversation in order for us to celebrate the life of Judge Langston McKinney. So it's going to be a great day. Sit back, and we know that those who are celebrating Judge McKinney will have something to say. Everybody loved Judge McKinney, and I think back to the time when there was a little tiff between him and the district attorney and how you showed up, Syracuse. You showed up as a community. There was an article this week in Syracuse.com, and Kate Rosenthal talked about the fact that 300 people, including my wife and her babies, mine too, showed up in that courtroom, cross-section of community. They basically said, you don't mess with this one. You don't mess with this one. That's our judge, and you don't mess with him. So we've got a great show for you today. Tribute to our good friend and my fraternity brother, member of the Alpha chapter of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, and of course, a member of the Syracuse Chi Pi chapter. We welcome you. We salute you, Judge Langston McKinney. Looking forward to a great conversation from the people who loved you and for the people who cared about you the most. So we're remembering Honorable Judge Langston McKinney with two of the individuals who he was colleagues with, Paula Johnson, Suzette Melendez, both at the Syracuse University College of Law. Let me start with you, Suzette. What are your memories of Judge Langston McKinney?
Well, so many memories, but I will start with the ones that are top of mind for me. Finally, yes, I do.
Suzette, so first of all, your title at the law school.
So my title at the law school is I'm a teaching professor there. Up until recently, I taught a children's rights and family law clinic for over 20 years. And I also teach family law, and I'm a faculty fellow to the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Office of Academic Affairs for the university.
Tell me what you want to say about Judge McKinney.
There are so many things that I can say. The ones that immediately come to mind is that he, for me and my family who knew him, was just an integral part of the community, not just the legal community, but the community in general, with regard to anyone that wanted to engage positively with the community. I also remember the way in which he engaged with our students year after year, with the law students, with students in general, but particularly our law students. For multiple years, many years, like he would swear in our clinic students at the beginning of the academic year, and he would really deliver an impactful statement about what they were about to engage in, even as law students. And his love and his passion and his dedication and overall belief in the law would always shine through. And he always injected that with his sense of humor, which always seemed to be present. And his deep sense of humanity. He never forgot who he was, where he came from.
Right.
He never forgot why he got into this in the first place, despite the fact that he came from a pretty intense science background. And I think that resonated with me. And I remember vividly, and I will end with this because I know there are others that really want to honor him. I remember vividly being at his retirement function that was sponsored by, I believe, the Onondaga County Bar Association, and it was packed. And Judge McKinney gave a statement, and we all know he loves to talk.
Would you say he never met a conversation he didn't like?
He didn't like, that's right. He had something to say. And even though he had a lot to say, he also was curious. He was curious about many things and many people. And that was evident when you interacted with him. But at the end of his retirement gathering, he shared a quote, and it was his quote, and I have repeated it over and over again. So it's become one of my mantras. I have a PowerPoint slide that I use all the time. And ironically, I was giving a presentation yesterday morning before I knew he had passed, and I used this quote yet again. And the quote is, "The world that we perceive is not the only one that exists." He repeated it. He said, "The world that we perceive is not the only one that exists." And I think that for me, the fact that I can share that with up and coming and new legal professionals, that was a gift. And it has never left me from the minute he said it. And the fact that I shared that quote again yesterday morning before I knew or even understand how close he was leaving this earth and this physical presence, just said to me that he will remain in our universe.
I love it. Suzette Melendez, Syracuse University College of Law. Thank you for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
I appreciate you. And I'm going to now step to Professor Paula Johnson, who I called. When I let her know, I said, "So what can we do?" And she says, "Well, here's what you should do. We need to celebrate and honor him." So I want to credit you, Professor Johnson, with the idea to come together. We've got a couple of other folks to get to as well. But Professor Johnson, share your thoughts, and I know there are a lot, on what Judge McKinney meant to you.
Wow. Thank you so much, George. And good evening to everybody. As I mentioned to George earlier, I'm kind of in transit, but I did want to participate in this conversation. So I'm calling in. And so hello to everybody. And let me, just say, I know on behalf of everyone who's joining this conversation and everybody who is listening and beyond, that we extend our deepest condolences to Linda Littlejohn, Judge McKinney's spouse, and their family on their particular loss. I mean, we are all feeling the loss of Judge McKinney, and I think it's also fair to say, I know it's certainly, excuse me, the case for me, that we all felt like extended family to Langston McKinney. He just, had that aura about him, that sensibility about him, that he just wrapped you up in his kindness. And whenever you were in his orbit, and I kind of, taking off on what Suzette was saying about, about his being in the universe, whenever you were in his orbit, you just felt like there was a gravitational pull towards him, and it was strong. So I guess I just begin with that. He was just so immensely human, and immensely humane. I can't remember exactly when we met, but I know it was, very soon after I came to Syracuse and taught at the College of Law. So it's been, decades now. And it was always just so wonderful to see him. We ran into each other in the grocery store, of course, in all the, professional environments and all of that. But we would run into each other at the grocery store, with our carts, pushing our our work carts. And I'm telling you, we would never finish our grocery shopping because we would just stand in the middle of whatever aisle where we ran into each other and just talk and talk and talk and talk. And he was in no rush, and you couldn't be in a rush when you were around him, and it was just a lovely, lovely thing. Um, I think of him, with this phrase. There is a French phrase, eminence grise, and what it has come to mean is to describe a person, something of an elder, but certainly somebody, experienced in their profession, or, whatever, work, or areas, where they predominate, and they're wise, they're wise, and and they're respected, and people seek them out for counsel. And I think of Judge McKinney in that way, as an eminent grise. I mean, he knew so much. He was interested in so much. I'm sure that is the scientist in him. But he just, he just was interested, in people, and in issues. Um, of course, including the law, but just in so much else. Um, you know, I as some of you know, I direct the Cold Case Justice Initiative. We look into racially motivated killings that happened primarily in the civil rights era. Well, Judge McKinney originally, hailed from Florida. And as we would talk about the cold cases, where people had not been held accountable for these killings, we talked about the situation in Florida and the cases that existed there. And so, just again, his range was far, his range was deep. Um, and I think that, perhaps Lynessa will talk about this too. But, as I think, you all know, I did some legal, history on the first Black grad of SU College of Law, Mr. William H. Johnson, who graduated in 1903, faced all kind of racism, couldn't get a legal job in Syracuse and all of that. And I mentioned to Judge McKinney that I was doing this research and this article on Mr. Johnson, well, to pay tribute to him as a pioneer. And Judge McKinney mentioned to me, well, his family is still here in the area. And so he turned me on to the Johnson family, and I got to know them, and, interviewed them, and, became a whole big thing. And they were, in the article, but also the posthumous admission of Mr. Johnson took place at the Syracuse, county courthouse. And I was just, I was just so pleased with the way that the community came out for that. And I was especially grateful and thanked Langston McKinney for helping me to help bring that story to light. I mean, he was just instrumental in all of our lives in just so many ways. So maybe I'll just stop my own remembrances, right there. And just to say, there's the African expression when great, people, pass on, and it is said that we have lost a great tree, or a great
Mm,
tree has fell.
hmm
And I think that, absolutely describes, the transition of Judge Langston McKinney. We have lost a great tree. But it is up to us, I will say,
Come
to
on.
maintain his legacy, to make sure, that this man who knew so much, who cared so much, who did so much for all of us, will never, never be forgotten, and that we will continue, to pay homage and honor to him, by living the life that he saw for us.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how would that translate uh, when you talk about living the legacy? How do we actualize that and put meat on that bone so that there is an actual marching order, if you will, or something to carry forward that's tangible and meaningful.
Hmm. Well, if I could just say another couple of words, I would say this. Everybody that I've spoken to, and I'm, hearing from people, everyone has described him as a gentleman, and he was. I mean,
Yeah.
he was an honorable person. He treated
hmm
people fairly and kindly and all that. But make no mistake, he was very fierce,
Okay.
about people's rights and what
Yes.
he wanted for people's rights. He was
hmm
very fierce about what it meant to be, a part of this legal profession, and how all people were treated in this profession. The importance of being a judge, and participation, in the, civic and civil, life, jury service, all of those things. And so he was adamant about those things, even, as, his demeanor, excuse me, was certainly gentlemanly. He was, somebody who, was an ardent, defender and advocate, and jurist. And so I think we can take those things to heart, that, we can make sure that we are equally insistent, upon, righting wrongs, about making sure that everybody is treated, with the right accord in whatever ways they interact with this legal system, or all of the social, systems in our society. The way that we teach, what we teach, these are the lessons of Langston McKinney. And I think that we can carry this forward wherever we are in this profession.
I appreciate it. Paula Johnson, would you just give us your little your who are you at the law school?
Good question, George. Good question. So I'm professor of law,
She's
at,
she's so many things,
at,
George.
at
So many things.
Syracuse University College of Law. And I direct the Cold Case Justice Initiative. And let me just add briefly too that, I am the faculty, advisor for, BALSA, which is the Black Law Students Association, and also Outlaw, which is the, LGBTQ plus Law Students Association. And past and present students have all benefited from Judge McKinney.
Appreciate that. That's Professor Paula Johnson. Our tribute to Honorable Judge Langston McKinney continues now. Let's bring in Lynessa Chaplin, Executive Director of the New York Civil Liberties Union. I'll get that right. Lynessa, who you doing? Who you representing tonight?
I think I'm just here representing myself
Okay.
primarily, also as the co-founder of the William Herbert Johnson Bar Association that I co-founded with Judge Langston McKinney.
Mm. Tell me about, you were the first person that I recall posting about the loss of Judge McKinney when we all found out. What did his passing mean to you, and what did he mean to you?
His passing devastated me, if I'm being honest. But who he meant to me, I think the world to me. Judge McKinney, as a fresh law school graduate who had returned back to Syracuse after being gone for 10 years, I first met his wife, the wonderful Linda Littlejohn, and she took me under her wing, and connected me back to the community that I was from, introduced me to her husband. And I was just this bright-eyed, bushy-tailed kid who was like, I can't believe that Syracuse doesn't have a Black Bar Association. And frankly, I felt very lonely here, being, not being connected to a Black legal community at the time and just trying to find my way. And Judge McKinney, I mean, he really went above and beyond as a mentor to me. We met weekly for a very long time. As we were creating the William Herbert Johnson Bar Association, we would meet for lunch and plot and plan and scheme. And I think at that time, we didn't know it was going to be the William Herbert Johnson Bar Association. We were like, this is the Black Bar. We'll think of a name later.
Right.
But when I think of Judge McKinney, I think of someone who always wanted to build a castle in the sky. He was always insistent on seeking justice in the most biggest, lavish way possible. He just was larger than life. His personality was genuine, authentic, honest. For me personally, there wasn't a career decision that I made without talking to him first. He was the go-to person for me, on all things in professional and personal. And so when I think of Judge McKinney, I think of someone that has always sought justice. I think of someone that was built in integrity and authenticity. And he wasn't afraid to challenge the system. And I love that about him. And he also wasn't afraid for me to challenge the system. Even if he didn't agree with me, he would still give me advice on how to move forward in something that he knew I was passionate about. And he wasn't afraid to tell me when I was being dramatic or too much. And so I just think that in this world, we don't really find that many people who have so many qualities, with such sincerity. And I just know for the Syracuse community in general, his reach spanned so far beyond the legal community. I mean, so far beyond the legal community. I couldn't name another judge who was more into the community than Judge Langston McKinney. He went to community events. He connected with community folks all the time. He would participate in debate club. He would be a judge for my debate club at the community center. I mean, he just was there if you needed him. And I know that he meant so much to people and encouraged people to find their voice. And also, more importantly, for my life, I think asserting that Black people belong in the legal field. And if we got to bust the door down and get that recognition, we'll get that recognition. And a part of the William Herbert Johnson Bar Association was doing just that, right? Finding a place for people to connect, have a safe space, and build together. And that's just really what his legacy is to me.
As I'm listening to you talk about him being a man, I don't know if you said it quite like this, a man of the people, but the way you described him as being, how do I want to call it? I'm envisioning him just sitting and talking to everybody and giving everybody the time of day, right? Like, it didn't matter who you were and what your station was, right? He always found time for you. Nobody was too big. Nobody was too small. Hey, come here. Let me just say this to you about that thing.
He didn't care about titles. He didn't care about who you were. He didn't care about how much money you had in the bank. I've seen Judge McKinney pour into people. Fun fact about me, I first met Judge McKinney when I was 17 before him in court. He didn't remember me. I had gotten into some trouble as a senior in high school, and I was before him.
Right.
As a defendant. And Judge McKinney, not knowing who I was like, what are you doing here? What's your problem? Like, what's going on in your life? Like, really started to pour into me in that moment. Probably one of my most weakest, most vulnerable moments in my life. And I just remember crying, saying, I gotta go home and take finals. I can't go to jail. And he was like, what do you mean you gotta take finals? And I was like, well, I'm in the 12th grade. I gotta take finals. I gotta go to prom. And he was like, well, what are you doing here? And I just remember him, yelling at me like a parent would and, sending me home. And so what's so funny about that is full circle. When I met him again, I just knew he would remember me. I was like, oh, Judge, I was before you when I was 17. He was like, that's how I treat everybody who walks in my courtroom. Like, that's how I pour into everyone who walks into my courtroom. So it's like, even in your lowest moment, he's going to pour love into you because he'll never stop believing in you. And that's just who he is. He didn't know me from anywhere. And he poured into me. And we always will have that funny memory for me to share, because I was kind of scared to meet him, because I was like, oh, he's going to remember me from when I was like a bad 17-year-old. And it just wasn't the case. He was like, he thrives on that kind of stuff. He really, really cares about giving back to his community. He really, really cares about how people see the world. And he just dedicated so much time to that. And the William Herbert Johnson Bar Association, through our community service, it was very evident. There wasn't an event he didn't miss or donate to. When we had no money and I was a young public service lawyer and I had no money, he was footing the bill for our Christmas parties. He was footing the bill for our community events, or he was kind of, encouraging the OCB, the Onondaga County Bar Association, to sponsor our events. So he always found a way, and he just, that's just who he was.
Impacting young lawyers like yourself, and it's also saying something about a man's legacy when you have a living tribute to you, right? McKinney Manor was named that while he was still ripping and running, and many people last saw him at the tribute to Marjorie Carter, another pioneer in the Syracuse community. Any other memories you want to share, Lynessa, before I go to our two next guests?
No, thank you for having me, and I appreciate you putting this together.
Thank you, and shout out to Professor Johnson for saying this is what you got to do. So let me bring in not only Judge Gordon Cuffy, but also Judge Derrek Thomas, fellow colleagues in the what do you call it, in the jurist world? I don't know, but Judge Derrek Thomas, City Court Judge, State Supreme Court Judge. Let me start with you, Derrek, Judge Thomas. Tell me about what Judge McKinney meant to you and his legacy.
In terms of what Judge McKinney meant to me, this is just an example. Today is my daughter's 16th birthday. She's 16 years old today, and I felt I had an obligation to pop in and pay homage and respect to Judge McKinney. We know the impact that he's had within the community, within the legal profession, and within the judiciary. And without Judge McKinney, there is no Judge Thomas, there is no Judge Bogan, there's no Judge Pitts Davis, no Judge Cuffy, no Judge Rivera, no Judge Boyd, and no Judge Stacey Dennis Taylor, who takes the bench next year. You are all part of that legacy. And Lynessa said some things that really stood out to me in terms of, yes, he always gave you advice, whether you liked it or not, right? Meaning in terms of how to conduct yourself, how to carry yourself, and especially as a judge of color. I remember speaking with Judge McKinney in terms of, okay, Judge McKinney, how should I handle myself? Do you have any insights, any tips for me? And I'm not going to share what he said to me, but I'm going to tell you, I carry that advice to this day in terms.
Well, you got to give me something now. Well, come on, Judge. Wait a minute.
Listen,
wait a minute, Your Honor.
Judge McKinney,
give me something. Give me something.
Judge McKinney. Listen, Judge McKinney was real, and he gave me very helpful advice as a judge of color in terms of how to conduct myself on a day-to-day basis, in terms of remembering the big picture, in terms of the individuals before us. And we know Judge McKinney has big shoes. And I remember when I first became a judge, because we know Judge McKinney's the first judge of color. And I had the pleasure of becoming the second male judge, right? You know, to take the bench. And everybody would say to you, no, Judge McKinney. Judge McKinney did this. Judge McKinney did that. And very impossible shoes to fill. And it takes all of us collectively to even try to remotely come close. And we still can't fill the shoe. So for me, you know, Lynessa talked about a number of things in terms of what Judge McKinney did, and in terms of especially her as a young person and the impact that he had on her. And I can say that hopefully I'm in Judge McKinney's camp in terms of trying to have that impact when young people are before us. But again, there's nobody like the first. Nobody like the first, and nobody like Judge McKinney. So again, I had an obligation to make sure that I appeared and honored Judge McKinney.
I appreciate that, Judge Thomas. And I know you're welcome to stick around as long as you want, but it is your daughter's birthday, so I understand if you have to pop off. But any other, I guess the last thing before, because I don't know when you have to pop off today that we're having this conversation, I do feel that you in some ways are trying to chart your own legacy in regard to helping young people not have to appear before you. Because if they get in front of you, it's a little bit too late, okay? If they're before you, it's a little bit too late. So I know that you're trying to do some things that might be a la the way that Judge McKinney saw the world.
Yeah, and it's really, it's a multi-pronged approach, right? You know, working with you, working with other community leaders, we try and do everything we can to keep these young people from appearing in front of us in the first place. However, if they happen to appear in front of us, we want to do everything we can to give them the tools and resources so that they don't appear in front of us again. And then, also, give them love. Sometimes it's tough love, but it's love nonetheless. Sometimes that tough love involves conversations that maybe they never had before. From the perspective of an elder or what have you. So, that multi-pronged approach, I believe is part of Judge McKinney's legacy and approach. And I'm going to be honest, in addition to making sure that people's rights are protected and so forth, I just personally believe it's part of our obligation, right? To do what we can to help the people who appear in front of us, and hopefully, help them to become, better individuals as they pursue whatever dreams and goals that they want, and to be of assistance in that, again, so that they hopefully don't appear in front of us anymore. Not unless they come in and tell us about their testimony or their success story, or like Lynessa, who's doing phenomenal things in her life, reaching back in terms of how that particular judge had an impact on her and the community.
All the way from 17 years old to now.
Yeah.
So Judge Cuffy, you have a unique relationship with Judge McKinney, because in part of your life you were standing before him as a prosecutor in the Onondaga County District Attorney's Office, among all of the other things that you've done in your legal career. And by the way, that was Judge Thomas, Syracuse City Court Judge. So let's hear from you on the both sides kind of thing, and what Judge McKinney meant to you, and what he meant to the community.
Well, let me start with this with Judge McKinney. He as you know, because you actually introduced me and Judge McKinney, Judge McKinney is extremely special to me because of the impact he has had on my career. I mean, he is very directly involved.
Lean back a little bit so we can see your face, brother. There we go.
He is very directly involved with my where I am now. And he's always been directly involved with everywhere I've been. There's no move that I have made where I have not consulted with Judge McKinney.
Like Lynessa, right? No move, right?
There's nothing I've done. I mean, I've been, I've been the county attorney. I've been the general counsel to the Thruway Authority. And before I accepted any of those positions, I spoke to Judge McKinney. Judge McKinney, as you're probably aware, wanted me to go into the Legal Aid Society when I came to Syracuse. I said, no, I'm a DA. and he helped me get to the DA's office. So he has been very instrumental in my career. I've appeared in front of him as an assistant district attorney. The thing about Judge McKinney, and I think that people have to understand, is just how brilliant he was. He was not a smart judge. He was a thoughtful, brilliant intellect as a judge. Somebody told me that I may have even read it, that he has forgotten more law than I've ever known. And that would be true to this day. He and I had arguments. We actually did a trial against each other in a mock trial at one point before, with Judge Sandra Towns being the judge and Judge McKinney representing the defense and myself representing the prosecution. It was a call-in trial, which the viewers actually voted on who won. They came to a tie. Judge Towns ruled that Judge McKinney won the trial. But we were so involved with each other. He was so much a part of my career. I use myself as an example as to the many people that he helped, particularly Black lawyers. And I was there for what Lynessa talked about, the forming of the Black Bar Association. And he was so integral in it. He was such a force in that he impacted everything. He was all of those things. But I remember him most as who he was as a person. He was a very kind and understanding person. I could turn to him if I had problems. As I told you, throughout my legal career, I have always consulted with him. I'm going to miss him for that. Somebody asked me if I was one of the people who would call him for advice. I said, I didn't have to call Judge McKinney for advice. If I saw him on the street, it was going to be 2 hours of lecture. Sometimes he would call, since I've been a judge, he'll call up my chambers. I said, oh boy, I'm about to hear from Judge McKinney. All right.
And I can hear how it started. Gordon,
what
you doing?
Let's talk about this. He was, I can't tell you how much he impacted me. And I saw his impact in the community. I love Lynessa's story because I saw that story play out hundreds of times. And as I saw him when I was a prosecutor in city court, a good friend of mine was assigned to him as his calendar DA in city court. And when I notified this person that he had passed away, he called me up with his voice as a young attorney who had been a prosecutor, and he was almost, tearful at the news. And he was saying, I was his prosecutor assigned to him. He said, I left the DA's. I speak to the guy every week. He said, I speak to him every week. He was so influential in my life. This was a white attorney who had been a prosecutor. He said, the guy was so influential, influential in my life. It was devastating news. He treated people very well. He is the model for what I try to do. I can't beat Judge McKinney. You know, when I was appointed to my position, he said, "Well, you're in the big leagues. This isn't misdemeanors, man. This is real serious stuff." But he did tell me, you got to treat the people in front of you with respect. You got to hear people out and hear both sides of the story. You've got to try to do what's right under the law. And you also got to make decisions that are fair. He was an incredible impact on me. I think he's been an incredible impact, not just on me, but the community at large. And I just want to, and the other thing I told my, I just want to talk about my daughter. I told my daughter, you know, that he passed and how she broke down with it, because that's who he was. He was always interested in what she was doing. He would give her advice. He wanted to know, you know, as you know, George, she's a writer. I want to know what she's writing. What book? Let me give her this idea, et cetera, et cetera. It's well beyond just the practice of law. It's who he was as a human being. He was one of the best human beings I ever met. And forget about him as a lawyer and how brilliant he was. He was just so caring, compassionate, and interested in you that I don't think it's very hard to find a human being that empathetic to other human beings. He was a great man. He was the best. I always say it.
A lot that you said there, and I'll open it back up to our guest in a second. But you've said to me that he was the judge. He was not just Judge McKinney, but he was the judge.
Yes.
Say more about that.
I said he was the judge, and I think Derrek talked about a little bit about him being the first black judge in this community. But he set the standard for what a judge is in this community, certainly for the black judges. He set the standard. He and I may disagree on this, that, and the other, but he was the standard that we all try to aspire to. I try to aspire to it. I can't reach what he was at. I cannot reach that level, the level he was at. But he was a courageous judge. All right. And if you're ever sitting in this position, you have to realize that this position takes courage. And he was a very courageous judge. And he was someone that everyone looked up to. I had court today, and I was talking with a defense lawyer, and we were laughing as we were talking. We were talking the pretrial of the case, but in the middle of the pretrial, we were throwing out Judge McKinney expressions. He said, "You remember when he said, I don't have a nickel in that dime?" Or, and I said, "Yeah, I tried to tell somebody the other day, it's time to fish or cut bait." He said, "You know, we all learned from Judge McKinney. He was a standard, and I think he's a standard that we should all aspire to be like."
I love it, and there's so many, you know, and I am yet another person who was on the receiving end of advice from Judge McKinney. He was that person you could call, "Hey, let me run something by you." And now that we're talking about him, I'm thinking there's one more thing I have to do that he commanded me to do that I haven't done yet. So I got to honor his legacy, I would do it. One thing you all should also know in terms of he was a good baker. So we would have this every year. We have our Omega Psi Phi Q Fry, and we could always count on Langston to bake 2 cakes for that. So he was also, among all of his other talents, he was also a pretty good baker. We could always count his 2 cakes for our Q5. I'm going to open up. Everybody can jump in now back on the call if there's something that someone said that you want to elaborate on, if there's something that reminded you of something else, or if you just want to add something else. I'm welcoming all of you to do that. And once again, thank you all for coming on and sharing. And I know when I sent this note out to Linda that we were putting this together, and she is very pleased that you all agreed, those who could do it, that you agreed to come on. So just wanted to tell you that Linda Littlejohn, very, very happy that this is happening as well. So you wanted to say something, Lynessa?
No, I was just reflecting on what Judge Cuffy said about, when Langston calls you, you know to pick up. And when I first started working at Night Clue, I had become very, very busy. I was like just getting off the ground with the ID1 project, and I was just swamped. And, Judge McKinney and I had a rhythm, right? We would talk and we had this rhythm, and I kind of got out the rhythm. And one day he called me at 6 a.m. and was like, "Hey, hot shit." Like, I know you're busy and all, but and he was saying that because I had been in the paper a few times quoted on the ID1 project, and he was like, I know you're busy and all, but I need to talk to you for a minute. And so that became the running joke. So every time he would call me after that, he was like, okay, I know you're busy, but let me just give you a few minutes. And then it'd be like an hour later, and we're still on the phone. And no matter where I went in my career, he was always my boss, right? Because when you get off the phone, you do have 4 or 5 assignments to do. And when he found out that I was relocating to DC, I was like, okay. So he gave me advice, told me if I should, what I should be. I was thinking about.
And did you do that? Did you?
Yeah, I've been in DC for about a year. And I would say about 1 month into relocating, Judge McKinney had called me and came up with a theory to legally challenge some DC laws. And so I thought, I was like, oh, so this is forever, right? And so he just was kind of like, I think we could challenge some DC laws. And he wanted to bring some policies that the public defender's office had in DC to Syracuse. And so now I was going to be the driver of that work for him. And he was just such just such a person where you're drawn to no matter what, right? And so even if the request is big and you're busy, you're going to honor it because it's coming from a very genuine place, and that he has, like Judge Cuffy said, he's brilliant. So he has these ideas, and you're like, well, let's just see where this goes. Let's pull this string. And he was just very connected to Night Clue as well as soon as I started. So he would start just calling up the attorneys that worked in other departments and having conversations with them about some impact litigation that he thought we should be considering. So, I mean, his impact just kind of, it's far and it's wide.
Anyone else want to add? And then as you were talking, Suzette.
Look, go ahead. Let me just say, I listened to Lynessa, and I've known Lynessa. I didn't know Lynessa was in DC. But I'm, as she probably knows, I'm blown away by Lynessa and what she's accomplished. But when you talk about DC and DC laws, he stopped me at the grocery store a couple of months ago. And he's having this deep conversation with me about bail in DC. All right. And he said, there are things that you need to apply in Syracuse, and you should be running some of these ideas is if I could do bail reform in Syracuse and change it to the DC model.
That was the case. That was the case. That's what he wanted me to do.
That is just McKinney for you. I'm sorry. When she said that, I just had to interject. He had me. I literally, we talked about that in the grocery store. He was leaving. He had done his shopping. I was trying to get in. And I sat there for over an hour and a half talking about this.
That seemed to be a theme.
Yeah. George, could I add something to this is Paula again. And I figure maybe we need a special room in the grocery store for for us to hold our meetings,
Well, if you're
Because
if you're in Wegmans in Syracuse, they got a pretty big room in the back, so you're
well,
good.
some great encounters would happen there. Let me just say. um, but so additional thoughts that I have are one. Well, let me just back up for a moment and say thank you for putting this together as quickly as you did. When we talked and we're saying what can we do, what should we do, the idea that I had was there should be a round table, not one speaker, not two, but let's have a round table, just as what's going on here, of people who were influenced by, connected to, Judge McKinney in all walks of life. As you've heard here, he just impacted the community in so many ways, not just in the legal community. And this has happened because, of course, I didn't know this about Lynessa, what happened when she was 17 years old. But one of the ideas, if you remember, George, was I said, what about also including someone who went before him and whose life was changed as a result of going before Judge McKinney, right? To hear all of the different perspectives. And so we've gotten that, it just happened organically. And so we've gotten all of that. But I wanted to say also that, among his many firsts was the law firm, first Black law firm.
May, McKinney, and Melchor.
Yes.
And we'll be hearing, hopefully we'll be hearing from Henry Melchor, if not in this session, in a separate session. But
Okay.
Henry Melchor is definitely going to be on. Hercules May passed away, but Henry Melchor obviously is still in town.
Yes. But just to say how important that continues to be, because Black lawyers of color still have difficulty breaking into this profession in this city, in this area. And so, that was, very important in terms of, opening a pathway, for not only the community to see, the abilities of Black attorneys, but for those attorneys to see themselves in those positions as well. And so this is still a struggle that we're in. And I think that is part of the legacy that we have got to live up to with, with honoring Judge McKinney in those ways. And so I guess the last thing I would say, he was in private practice and he had his, law firm, but that he came from legal services.
Yeah.
Says so much about, who he was and what he thought about the law and where it should reach throughout the community. So I think all of those things are just so important in terms of remembering the fullness of his life and his values and his being.
Suzette?
Yeah, I want to pick up where Paula left off in terms of, his legacy, because when I met him and I'm a transplant, I had just gotten here, and he knew that I had a legal aid, legal services background. He knew that I had sought a profession in the law to do that kind of work, public interest work. And, that's where we first connected. And, I also want to say that part of his legacy, in addition to what everybody else talked about, what Paula just said, is what we don't see very much of right now, which is his ability to talk across difference, no matter who you were, no matter where you came from. And for me, as I think about what do I take from this life that was so well lived, that's part of it, because, you know, we all know the times that we are in. And he seemed to rise above that. And when we now have this bar group that is referred to as Arriba, and Judge Cuffy and Judge Thomas and Judge Bogan know it well, because when we were trying to formulate this, they were right there with us at the foundational basis. WHJ had been formed. You heard that from, from Lynessa. And when we wanted to do something like that, because there was no representation in Central New York for legal professionals, attorneys of Latina, Latino, Latine descent, we decided, and it was mainly Judge Ramon Rivera and some others. And, we time after time, Judges Cuffy, Bogan, and Thomas participated in those meetings, and they helped us. And we are now operating under the sponsorship of the Puerto Rican Bar Association, which is located in primarily the New York City area. And we had a meeting earlier today, and when they learned of Judge McKinney's passing, they want to honor him, and they post every time one of the judges that is part of that group, that is a member of that group, passes, they will honor that person. And we had a representative at our meeting today, and they said, you know what, let us know, because we want to honor this person. And I think that speaks to Langston's reach.
Yeah.
How he was able to geographically, across race, across ethnicity, across identity, just go beyond. And I think that is very much part of his legacy. And, I love the fact that he, started out in the realm of chemistry, because, he is known to my family. I'm right side of the brain. My husband is left side of the brain. He is like electrical engineer, and he would love bumping into Langston and just engaging in conversation, and they would just cut up, and I know that which Judge Cuffy speaks of the Wegmans visits, because ironically, this is where I see Judge Cuffy is in Wegmans. So I'm going to stop you now more in the aisle. And we're going to continue this tradition,
Nice.
And I'll buy you a Wegmans cup of coffee or a slice of pizza. But, and it was, I know the reference that was made earlier, and I'll end with this, that I believe it was Judge Fahey, who was his campaign manager, who said that Judge McKinney forgot more law than most lawyers know.
Right.
And I just thought that was beautiful, because especially with regard to like what, Paula just said, that we are still struggling in terms of attorneys who are Black, who are of color, right, to make our place in this profession. The fact that that was said about the first Black judge, right, on the Syracuse City Court, I think really honored who Judge Langston McKinney was. And, we met Linda as a result of him. And, like Lynessa said, and there's even a connection beyond that. Like, I think we figured out that Linda and my husband might actually be like third cousins. And that's just what Langston did. He just brought people together.
Brought people together. That's a good one.
He brought people together. And, you know, when there was a difference of opinion, he would say, you know, something along the lines, well, tell me more about that. I'm curious about that. Tell me more about that. And we've lost that as a society. And so I would like very much for that to be his legacy.
Yeah, and to your point, like lost the idea to have robust conversations, even in difference, so
That's
that
right.
because I want to hear what I want to understand your point of view, even if it's not the same as mine. And I want to remind people, and this is not a little known Black history fact, but I want to remind people. So he was the first Black judge, and he was appointed by Mayor Tom Young, and I was in the administration at the time, so he was appointed. But then he ran for re-election, folks. And so I want to talk about the importance of voting. And he ran, and when he ran, Judge Sandra Towns, first Black woman, right? She got the most votes of anybody that year. And Judge McKinney won by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9, right? 9 votes. So when we think about what's happening in this voting cycle and the importance of your vote counting, just remember, Judge McKinney won by 9 votes. And that means that somebody didn't vote, or the 9 votes made a difference. That means your vote counts. And he would say that too. Your vote counts. And wow, it's does anybody have any closing thoughts for this round? You've been great. I've really enjoyed listening to all of the tributes and the stories and the impact. So if there are any final thoughts from any of you talking
George,
about
just one last thing.
Oh,
Yes.
Go ahead. Sorry, Paula.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who was that, Lynessa?
Yeah.
Just real quickly, Lynessa, I want to say this because you were related to Suzette's a comment about honoring him by other bar associations. The Franklin H. Williams Judicial Commission posted the announcement about Judge McKinney's passing today. I serve as a commissioner on this commission, and it's designed to increase racial and ethnic diversity and fairness throughout all of the court systems in New York State. And so, he will be remembered and honored. And the jurists, throughout the state of New York are certainly, taking note of his passing, and honoring him, and so many people have been touched and are aware of just how monumental a person he was in so many of the capacities that we've been talking about tonight. So I just wanted to add that. And thanks again, everybody.
I appreciate you. That's Paula Johnson, professor of law at Syracuse University College of Law. And Judge Thomas had to step away. As you know, he was celebrating his daughter's birthday, so he had to go deal with that obligation. But his wife, Jerusha, wanted to get in on this conversation. And she said that as a kid, she would be at Judge McKinney's house almost every day. And to Paula, he wanted to say that he would always run into Judge McKinney at Lowe's while they were looking for plants, and he would always tell his kids, "This is the first Black judge in Syracuse." And so that's from Judge Derrek Thomas, Syracuse City Court judge, who had to leave us, but he wanted to leave us with those little bit of tidbits that you've all shared. And to Lynessa. So Lynessa, what is your title now, please, in DC?
So I am the director of the Racial Justice Center at the New York Civil Liberties Union. So while I live in DC, I still spend a significant time in New York.
All right.
But I did want to end on this note, and I think it's important. I think we're all kind of talking about this. I was on the phone this morning with Linda Littlejohn, Judge McKinney's wife, and she said something to me so profound and yet so simple that it will stick with me. And she just said, for everybody you touch, you have to think, how many people do they touch?
Mm.
And the trickle effect that it creates. And so when we think about Judge Langston McKinney and how many people he touched, I just think it's no stretch of the imagination or exaggeration to say that he has impacted thousands of people's lives, generations of people, from all walks of life in all areas of this country. And so I'm not surprised that he was the first Black judge in Syracuse, because he's a phenomenal person. And whenever you're talking about breaking racial barriers, you have to be a phenomenal person. And so I just think you're not going to bump into a single person, whether they know it or not, who has not been touched by Judge McKinney in this city.
Amen.
Yes.
Amen. Well, Lynessa Owens-Chaplin.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Appreciate you. Suzette Melendez, unless anything more you want to add. Suzette, you good? And of course, State Supreme Court Judge Gordon Cuffy joining us, and Paula Johnson and Judge Derrek Thomas. Thank you all for this great conversation and tribute. And this is all to honor the great legacy of the one and only Judge Langston C. McKinney. May his legacy live on. Our love and our prayers go to Little John and his sons and extended family. We wish you all love and support, inspiration for the nation. Our tribute to Honorable Judge Langston McKinney. George Kilpatrick, inspiration for the nation, celebrating people we feel good about. Of the many things that Brother Judge Langston McKinney has been involved in is the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, incorporated in here to talk about what Judge McKinney has meant to the brotherhood, particularly, is not only then the chapter president of the Chi Pi chapter of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, Brother Nathaniel Big Nate Brown. Nate, how you doing, and what you want to say about Brother McKinney?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I just wanted to say that Brother McKinney exemplified the four cardinal principles of Omega Psi Phi: manhood, scholarship, perseverance, and uplift. He was a very gentle giant, man, and it just as I walk around my office today, being a part of the law enforcement family, it was just so inspiring to hear nothing but good things said about Judge McKinney. As a judge, you can always expect to hear some negative things, due to the fact of the judge didn't do what someone liked or wanted them to do. But they were always saying that he was fair and he was a positive image for the Black community. And, that was very inspirational. And I was just proud to be called a brother of Brother Langston.
Yeah, and so and think about this, Nate. How was he impacting your personal life? How did he impact you personally?
Well, growing up in Syracuse, it was very inspirational to see the likes of him, Brother Donnell Hicks, Brother Dwight Hicks, Ben Jeffers. The list goes on of all the positive brothers of Omega Psi Phi that have really put their footprint on Syracuse. And just, he wasn't always the loudest person, and he didn't always have to be let everybody know what he was doing, but he was always uplifting the community and serving the community, even when people didn't know it.
Yeah, especially with people who didn't know it. And of course, He was a member. He was initiated in Alpha chapter at Howard University. He graduated as a chemistry major and came to Syracuse to attend Syracuse University Law School. But Brother Nate, we just wanted to make sure that we had the brothers of Omega Psi Phi represented in this tribute to our dear brother and community pioneer and icon, Brother Judge Langston McKinney. Anything else you want to say about our dear brother?
He was a great brother, man. There's nothing else to say about him. He's just, I know a lot of people, you get excited to meet superstars, or you talk about people that have been part of certain cultures that uplift, doing marches and things like that. But I was glad to have known a great man, and not only that, but he was a pioneer, being the first African American judge in Syracuse, New York, where I'm proud to call my home. I was born and raised here, so that really means a lot to me,
And a great legacy to build on. Nate Brown, president, the Syracuse Chi Pi chapter of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Thank you, Nate, and appreciate your time.
Thank you, George.
Manhood, scholarship, perseverance, uplift, inspiration for the nation. George Kilpatrick, inspiration for the nation, celebrating people we feel good about, and we continue remembering the great Honorable Langston McKinney, the first African-American city court judge. Our next guest, though, shares another piece of unique history with Langston McKinney in that they formed what we believe is the first African-American law firm partnership in the city of Syracuse. Henry Melchor joins us, retired from practice, but certainly, Henry, you are part of history along with Langston McKinney. First of all, your reflections on your good friend and former partner.
Yes, Langston was a unique individual. He was generous with his time and his energy with many people. And I didn't know him well until we became partners in the law firm of May, McKinney, and Melchor in 1980. We had attended a luncheon, if you will, for Black attorneys in Central New York, and we had a great time. The late Judge Sandra Towns was there, and attorney named Paul Richardson, just trying to remember. Elijah Hewling, who's town justice in Baldwinsville. It was a good group. And I think that's where the seed was planted about forming a Black law firm. And so as it turned out, it was Hercules Bill May, Langston McKinney, and myself who actually organized May, McKinney, and Melchor in January 1st, 1980. And we practiced together for 6 years. And over that time, I got to discover what a skilled attorney Langston was. It's my recollection. He was very knowledgeable about the rules of evidence and other matters involving criminal law. And I was a novice in criminal law. I hadn't practiced that area at all before we came together as partners. So I relied on Langston continuously for advice and counsel as I was attempting to represent clients in the criminal courts in Syracuse. But it wasn't just his assistance to me. Langston was actually consulted by many of the leading criminal defense attorneys at that time who would stop by the office and ask him for Langston. They'd sit down and consult with him, and he would advise them on various issues that they were having with their cases. But so it wasn't just me, but many attorneys in Syracuse called on Langston for advice in that area. But I also remember Langston was a chemist by education, undergraduate education anyway, and then came to Syracuse Law School, became a lawyer. But one of the significant matters our firm handled was for an engineering firm in Syracuse that was involved in administering back in the early 80s wastewater pretreatment programs. There was a lot of federal money available, but to qualify, municipalities had to, in addition to having an engineered plan for upgrading their wastewater treatment facilities, they also had to have procedures in place for public hearings and administrative rules as to how the projects were going to be implemented. And so the engineering firm hired us to draw up these rules. And Langston was the lead attorney on that project. And with his chemistry background, it was a natural for him. The first client we served was the city of Johnstown in New York. And so Langston prepared those rules. They were approved by I think it was the EPA. I'm not totally recalling.
EPA, DEC, one of them, right?
Right, one of those environmental agencies. And so those rules and procedures for public hearings and other implementation of these wastewater pretreatment facilities, that became the template for many, many municipalities throughout New York State. And Langston was responsible for that. So, of course, these were the years before he went on the city court bench. But I'm going to miss him very much. And we had been in consultation. He was still handling cases right up until the time of his death. And we would consult periodically about some issue or that Langston was going to explore. And it was usually some cutting edge theory that he was developing. And I think he would call on me to maybe bring him back down to earth on what was possible, in my view. What was possible, what would be received and had a possibility for success. And so we were scheduled to have lunch actually coming up, but unfortunately he had to be hospitalized and then passed away before we could do that. But we had as usual with Langston, it was about an hour or more conversation.
That's a recurring theme.
Yes. If Langston was calling, you had to, in my recollection, have at least an hour or so available. And it was all good. We explored a lot of issues in those conversations.
I should say you retired from Bond, Shinnick & King as a partner as you went on in your legal career in Syracuse. And certainly the part of history that you played in his life certainly is something that I just want to remind people of, because like you said, it seemed, you said y'all were just at a lunch and y'all said, let's do it. And then y'all did it. Right. And I'm looking for some, we felt like we had to, and it was just an idea, but you hadn't thought about it before this luncheon?
Well, I think individually we had, and the three of us, I guess, were at a point in our careers we were ready to try something like this. And like I said, we were together for 6 years and we gave it our best shot as collectively. I think the problem from my perspective was that although law school teaches you the language of law and the theories and concepts that have been accepted, and in my case, my legal education also taught me to challenge those established principles when I thought it was necessary to adequately represent a client. But the one thing they really did not teach at that stage, and I'm sure they emphasize it more now, was marketing and how to obtain clients.
Different than today, right? Because at that point, lawyers really couldn't advertise, if I understand it. Or was it?
I'm not talking about marketing in the sense of advertising, but how do you let people know what you're capable of doing so that they want to hire you as a attorney?
Right.
You're right. Advertising was very restricted when I started practicing law, but
Yeah.
even more so, you still needed to, well, it became with us, since I wasn't really bringing any clients from Brown, Shinnick, and King with me to May, McKinney, and Melchor.
Pretty much, right. Let's start with that, right?
Right. So I really had to generate clients in order for us to succeed. And I wasn't, I'd been with Bond, I think 6 years, but I wasn't that well known. I was involved in the community, but I think of the three of us, I was probably the least known. But without clients, your firm's not going to succeed. And I tell people, Black attorneys who approach me about it, I said, well, you've got to have a business plan. And that was something we didn't even think about when we weren't sure. I wasn't sure where the clients were going to come from. And, although we did build a book of business, if we had been more, let's say, creative, maybe in our approach, it's not about just hanging up a shingle and people line up outside your door. So that was really the difficult part for us, and why the firm didn't continue. But we did have some notable successes. We represented the NAACP in the lawsuit that the federal government brought against the city of Syracuse for the recruitment and hiring of more Black police officers and firefighters.
Cool. So
we were intervenor plaintiffs on behalf of the NAACP in that lawsuit. And the NAACP was an interested party because they were encouraging people to take the civil service exam and actually recruiting people to do that. And so the lawsuit was successful. The federal government, the city of Syracuse, and the NAACP reached a consent decree. And it's interesting because until very recently, I would be introduced to somebody, and they say to me, I'm a member of the police department, or I'm a member of the fire department, and it's because of what you and the NAACP did that I have that position. So, and it was important. I guess it was under some recent litigation was being challenged, but I think the consent decree survived and is still in force. And so firefighters and police officers of color are still benefiting. And to be honest with you, the institutions they represent benefit from that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Paving the way. Well, Henry Melchor, any final thoughts on your former partner but friend, Judge Langston McKinney?
Well, like I said, my basic familiarity came through those years, 1980, 1986, when we were law partners. But I'll just tell this story. I think I told this at Langston's retirement party. I had returned to Bond, Shinnick, and King, and I was in my office or walking down the hall, and one of the legal secretaries came up to me and says, "Mr. Melchor, do you know Judge McKinney?" I said, well, yes, I know him very well. And she said, oh, he's such a wonderful man. She said, I was over in traffic court today, and I had a case in front of him, and he listened to me. I said, well, that's certainly his character and quality. And I said, but what happened to your case? She says, oh, he fined me $75, but he listened to me. And that's really all she wanted, somebody to hear her. And I remember telling that story, and a lot of the lawyers and other people who were in the courtroom said, yeah, he listened to everybody, and it made the calendar go that much longer. But it was just an example of one of the quality he had, and the way people remember him for being that type of caring individual, even in his position as a city court judge.
Henry Melchor, thank you so much, retired from Bond, Shinnick and King, but also part of the first, we believe, Black law firm in the history of the city of Syracuse. May, McKinney, and Melchor, Henry Melchor, with a unique perspective. And thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, George.
Inspiration for the nation.